I planned the perfect anniversary party, but he had a plan of his own. And when the truth came out, everything fell apart, right in front of our families. I'm Vanessa, I'm 28, and my life basically exploded 3 weeks ago in the most humiliating way possible. Everyone thinks they know the story, but they don't know my side. They don't know what it was like living with Warren for 7 years, watching him turn into this completely different person. So here's what really happened, and honestly, I don't care anymore who gets upset about it. Warren and I had been together since we were basically kids. 7 whole years of my life. 7 years of building what everyone thought was this perfect relationship. I work in event planning, so I'm literally surrounded by romance and perfect moments all day, and I thought I had that with Warren too. He works in sales, always stressed about numbers and quotas and whatever, but in the beginning, he was different. He used to surprise me, take me on random drives, actually listen when I talked about my day. We had this little house that we'd been fixing up together, and everyone always said we were relationship goals. I posted about us constantly because, honestly, I was proud of what we had. But somewhere along the way, Warren just checked out, like, completely checked out. I don't know if it was work stress or what, but he became this zombie who came home, ate dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd just say he was tired or that I was being dramatic. Dramatic? Can you believe that? I'm trying to save our relationship, and I'm being dramatic. He stopped planning dates, stopped asking about my work, stopped doing all the little things that made me fall for him in the first place. I felt like I was living with a roommate, not a boyfriend. That's when Frank started coming around more. Frank is Warren's younger brother, and honestly, he's everything Warren used to be. He's fun, he's spontaneous, he actually pays attention when you're talking. Frank would come over for family dinners or to watch games with Warren, and while Warren would just zone out on his phone, Frank would ask me about my latest events, remember details about my clients, actually engage with me like I was a real person. It wasn't anything weird at first, just normal conversation, but it felt so good to have someone actually see me again. I started looking forward to Frank's visits more than I should have. When Warren would ignore me all evening, Frank would compliment my cooking or ask about this difficult bride I'd been dealing with. He made me feel heard, like I mattered. I know how this sounds, but I swear it wasn't intentional. I just craved that connection that Warren had stopped giving me. Frank was giving me the attention that my own boyfriend couldn't be bothered with, and honestly, it felt amazing to remember what it was like to be appreciated. The conversations got longer. Frank would stay after Warren went to bed, and we'd talk about everything. My dreams for expanding my business, his plans to maybe start his own company, how different we both felt from when we were younger. These weren't shallow conversations either. Frank really listened to me talk about my childhood, about how my dad never really paid attention to me growing up, about how important it was for me to feel valued by the person I'm with. Warren knew all this stuff about me, but he'd stopped caring. Frank not only listened, he understood. He told me I deserved better than being taken for granted, and honestly, hearing someone say that out loud was like a revelation. Warren had no idea any of this was happening because he was so wrapped up in his own world. He'd come home, barely acknowledge me, eat whatever I'd made, and then disappear into work emails or TV. Meanwhile, Frank and I were having these deep, meaningful conversations about life and feelings and dreams. I felt more connected to Frank in a few months than I had to Warren in years. I know that probably sounds terrible, but I can't help how I felt. Warren had emotionally abandoned me long before I ever developed feelings for anyone else. I started texting Frank during the day, just casual stuff at first. Funny memes, complaints about bridezillas, random thoughts, but it escalated quickly into daily conversations about everything and nothing. Frank would ask how my morning was going while Warren wouldn't even say goodbye when he left for work. Frank remembered when I had big presentations and would check in to see how they went. Warren couldn't even remember what I did for a living half the time. The emotional connection I was building with Frank felt more real than anything I'd had with Warren in ages. People might judge me for this, but I don't think they understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own relationship. To have someone you love treat you like you're just part of the furniture. Frank saw me, really saw me, and valued what he saw. He made me feel beautiful and interesting and worth listening to. Warren made me feel like a burden, like my feelings and needs were too much trouble to deal with. When someone makes you feel that small for that long, and then someone else comes along who makes you feel important again, it's hard not to be drawn to that. The texting became constant. Good morning messages from Frank while Warren rushed out the door without a word. Check-ins during lunch while Warren never even answered my calls anymore. Frank started calling me during his breaks just to hear my voice, and I found myself looking forward to those calls more than coming home to Warren. We'd talk for hours about everything, his dreams, my frustrations, how we both felt like we were settling for less than we deserved in life. Frank told me I was too good for someone who couldn't see my worth, and honestly, he was right. I started finding excuses to see Frank more often. I'd invite him over when Warren was working late, which was most nights anyway. We'd order takeout and actually have conversations about life instead of sitting in silence like Warren and I did. Frank would help me plan events, give me feedback on my ideas, make me feel like my work actually mattered to someone. When I told Warren about difficult clients or stressful deadlines, he'd just grunt or change the subject. When I told Frank, he'd ask follow-up questions and actually care about my answers. The emotional intimacy was intoxicating. Frank remembered every detail about my life, while Warren couldn't even remember when I had important meetings. Frank would bring me coffee from that place I mentioned liking once 3 months ago. Warren couldn't remember how I took my coffee after 7 years together. Frank made me feel seen and valued in ways Warren had completely stopped doing. I started sharing things with Frank that I'd given up trying to share with Warren. My fears about the future, my dreams for my business, my frustration with feeling stuck. Frank understood me in ways Warren never had, even in our best times. When I told Frank about my childhood and how my dad's emotional absence affected me, he actually got it. He told me I deserved someone who made me feel secure and valued every single day. Warren knew all about my daddish, but had never connected how his own emotional distance was triggering the same feelings. Frank not only understood, he actively worked to make me feel the opposite. Important, cherished, heard. I know what this looks like from the outside, but people don't understand the context. Warren had been emotionally neglecting me for over a year. I tried talking to him, suggesting counseling, planning special dates, everything I could think of to reconnect. He'd either dismiss my concerns or promise to try harder, and then change nothing. Meanwhile, Frank was giving me everything Warren used to give me, and more. The conversations, the attention, the feeling of being truly cared for. Frank was providing all of that while Warren couldn't even be bothered to ask about my day. The physical attraction was inevitable. When someone makes you feel that valued and connected, when they actually see you as a person worth investing in, it's natural to feel drawn to them. Frank would compliment me in ways Warren had stopped doing years ago. He'd notice when I wore something new or got my hair done. Warren wouldn't notice if I dyed my hair purple. Frank made me feel beautiful and desirable again. Something I'd forgotten I could feel after months of Warren treating me like I was invisible. We started having longer conversations when Warren was asleep or working late. Frank would stay after family dinners, and we'd talk on the porch for hours. We'd sit closer together, find excuses to touch hands when passing things, let our eyes meet in ways that meant something. The chemistry was undeniable, and honestly, it felt more real than anything I'd felt with Warren in forever. Frank saw me as this vibrant, interesting woman, while Warren saw me as just another obligation to manage around his work schedule. I started looking forward to seeing Frank more than I looked forward to seeing my own boyfriend. When Warren would text that he'd be late from work again, I'd feel relief instead of disappointment because it meant maybe Frank would stop by. When Warren would fall asleep on the couch during our date nights, I'd text Frank and we'd have better conversations than Warren and I had managed in months. Frank was becoming my emotional support system, while Warren was becoming a stranger I happened to live with. The guilt was there, but it was overshadowed by finally feeling alive again. Finally feeling like someone genuinely enjoyed my company and valued my thoughts and feelings. Warren had been taking me for granted for so long that I'd started to believe maybe I wasn't worth the effort. Frank reminded me that I was worth being pursued, worth deep conversations, worth someone's full attention. He was giving me everything I'd been begging Warren for, and Warren didn't even notice because he was too wrapped up in his own world to see what was happening right in front of him. The day everything changed was a Tuesday. Warren was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings all day, some big presentation he'd been stressing about for weeks. He barely said 2 words to me that morning, just grabbed his coffee and rushed out like always. I'd taken the day off to prep for our anniversary party that weekend, but honestly, I was feeling so disconnected from Warren that the whole celebration felt fake. 7 years together, and we felt like strangers. I was questioning everything about our relationship, wondering if this was really what I wanted for the rest of my life. Frank texted me around noon asking if I needed help moving furniture for the party setup. Warren had mentioned needing to rearrange the living room, but of course he hadn't actually helped with any of the planning. Frank offering to help felt so natural, so caring, exactly what I needed. I said yes without even thinking about it. When he showed up, he brought lunch from my favorite place and actually seemed excited about helping me create something beautiful for the party. Warren couldn't even be bothered to give input on decorations, but Frank was genuinely interested in my vision. We started moving the couch and chairs around, and Frank was being so sweet about everything. He kept asking what I thought would look best, complimenting my eye for design, making me feel like my opinions actually mattered. We were laughing and talking, and it felt so good to have someone there who actually wanted to be there, who wasn't treating spending time with me like a chore. When Warren and I did projects together, he always acted like it was such a burden, like I was asking too much of his precious time. The physical work meant we were close together, touching hands when we both reached for the same thing, brushing against each other in the narrow spaces. Frank smelled amazing, like this cologne I'd never noticed before, and every time he'd lean close to move something heavy, I'd catch myself breathing it in. When we finally got everything arranged how I wanted it, we collapsed on the couch together, both a little sweaty and laughing about how much work it was. Frank looked at me and said, "I was amazing for pulling all this together. That Warren was lucky to have someone who cared so much about making things special." That's when it shifted. Frank reached over and tucked this piece of hair behind my ear that had come loose while we were working, and the way he looked at me was so intense, like he really saw me, all of me, and liked what he saw. No one had looked at me like that in years. Warren looked through me most of the time, or looked at me with irritation when I wanted to talk about something important. Frank was looking at me like I was the most fascinating person in the world, and I felt beautiful for the first time in forever. I should have pulled away, I should have said something to break the moment, but honestly I didn't want to. I wanted to feel desired and valued and seen, and Frank was offering all of that. When he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't stop him. I kissed him back because it felt like coming alive after being dead for months. It felt like finally being appreciated by someone who understood my worth. Warren had made me feel invisible for so long that Frank's attention felt like oxygen after drowning. The kiss turned into more, obviously. Frank was so gentle and attentive, asking if I was okay, telling me how beautiful I was, how long he'd been thinking about this. It felt incredible to have someone be so present with me, so focused on me and my feelings. Warren and I hadn't been truly intimate in months because he was always too tired or too stressed or too distracted. Frank was completely there with me, making me feel cherished in ways I'd forgotten were possible. We ended up in my bedroom, and I know how terrible that sounds, but in that moment it felt right. It felt like I was finally getting the connection and intimacy I'd been craving for so long. Frank was everything Warren wasn't: present, attentive, passionate, grateful to be with me. He made me feel sexy and wanted and valuable, all the things Warren had stopped making me feel. I felt guilty about the location, but not about finally feeling alive again. I was so caught up in finally feeling desired and appreciated that I didn't hear Warren's car in the driveway. I didn't hear the front door open or his footsteps on the stairs. Frank and I were completely lost in each other, in this amazing connection we'd been months. I was feeling things I hadn't felt in years: passion, excitement, the thrill of being truly wanted by someone. The last thing on my mind was Warren coming home early from his precious meetings. When Warren appeared in the doorway, everything stopped. Not just the physical stuff, but like time itself just froze. Frank and I were tangled up in my bed, The same bed Warren and I had shared for years, and Warren was just standing there with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just completely cold. He had his phone out, and I heard the camera sound, and I realized he was taking pictures. Not just one or two, but multiple photos from different angles, like he was documenting evidence. I tried to say something to explain, but Warren just held up his hand to stop me. He didn't yell or scream or throw anything like I expected. He just took his pictures, looked at both of us with this disgusted expression, and walked out. I heard his car start up and drive away, and Frank and I just sat there in shock. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. I kept expecting Warren to come back and confront us, to give me a chance to explain how we'd gotten to this point, but he just left. Frank panicked immediately. He started getting dressed and talking about how Warren was going to kill him, how this was going to destroy their family, how we needed to figure out what to say. But honestly, I was more confused than panicked. Warren had seemed so detached from our relationship that part of me wondered if he'd even care that much. Maybe this would be the wake-up call he needed to realize what he'd been taking for granted. Maybe seeing that someone else valued me would make him remember why he fell for me in the first place. The next 2 days were the strangest of my life. Warren came home that night and acted completely normal. He said hi, asked about my day, ate the dinner I made, watched TV with me like nothing had happened. I kept waiting for him to bring up what he'd seen, to ask questions, to explode anything. But he just went about his routine like it was any other day. Frank was texting me constantly, freaking out about what Warren might be planning. But Warren seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. He was more present and talkative than he'd been in months. I started wondering if maybe Warren hadn't actually seen what I thought he'd seen. Maybe he'd just glanced in and left without really processing what was happening. Maybe those camera sounds I heard were just notifications from his phone. I mean, if he'd really caught his girlfriend and his brother together, wouldn't he be acting differently? Wouldn't he be angry or hurt or demanding explanations? Instead, he was being nicer to me than he'd been all year. Warren even helped me finish setting up for the anniversary party, which was completely out of character for him lately. He moved furniture without complaining, hung decorations where I asked, even complimented how everything looked. He seemed genuinely excited about the party, talking about how nice it would be to celebrate with our families. I started feeling hopeful that maybe this whole thing with Frank had somehow reset our relationship, reminded Warren of what he had with me. Frank was a wreck, though. He kept asking if Warren had said anything, if I thought we should tell him ourselves, if maybe he should talk to Warren man to man. But I told him to calm down. Warren was acting normal, which meant either he didn't see what we thought he saw or he was choosing to overlook it and focus on rebuilding our relationship. Either way, bringing it up would just create unnecessary drama. Frank disagreed, but I convinced him to follow my lead and act normal too. The morning of our anniversary party, Warren was in such a good mood. He brought me coffee in bed, which he hadn't done in forever, and told me he had a special surprise planned for the party. He said he'd been working on something for weeks that would show everyone how much I meant to him. I felt this rush of hope that maybe we'd finally turned a corner, that Warren had realized how close he'd come to losing me and was ready to be the partner I'd been needing all along. I spent the whole day getting ready, doing my hair and makeup perfectly. Wearing this dress I knew Warren loved. Frank came early to help set up, and he seemed calmer than he'd been the past few days. Warren was being so sweet to both of us, joking around with Frank like brothers do, complimenting me every few minutes. The three of us working together to get everything ready felt almost normal, like maybe we could all move past this and be okay. Guests started arriving around 6, and it was perfect. Both our families, all our closest friends, everyone who'd been part of our 7-year journey together. People kept telling us how cute we were together, how they couldn't wait to see what the next 7 years would bring. Warren's mom made a speech about how proud she was of the man Warren had become, and how lucky they felt to have me as part of their family. Frank's parents talked about how wonderful it was to see Warren so happy and settled. Warren seemed to be soaking up all the attention and praise. He kept his arm around me all night, introducing me to people as the love of his life, telling stories about our early days together. I felt like I was seeing glimpses of the old Warren, the one who used to make me feel special and cherished. Maybe catching me with Frank had been exactly the shock he needed to remember how much I meant to him. Maybe this party would mark a new beginning for us. After dinner, Warren stood up and asked for everyone's attention. He had this huge smile on his face as he talked about how the past 7 years had been the best of his life, how much he'd learned about love and commitment and partnership. He talked about all the memories we'd made together, all the ways I'd supported his dreams and pushed him to be better. He said he had a special presentation to show everyone what our relationship meant to him, and I felt my heart racing with excitement. Warren pulled out his laptop and started showing pictures of us through the years, photos from our first date, our first vacation, holidays with family, all these beautiful moments from our life together. Everyone was smiling and laughing at the memories, and I felt so proud of what we'd built together. This was exactly what I'd been missing, Warren acknowledging our relationship publicly, showing everyone how much I meant to him. The presentation was beautiful and romantic, and everything I'd been craving from him. Then the pictures changed. Suddenly, there I was on the screen in our bedroom with Frank, multiple photos from different angles showing everything in explicit detail. The room went completely silent. I watched our family's faces change from happiness to shock to disgust. Warren's mom gasped and covered her mouth. My own parents looked like they'd been slapped. Frank went white as a sheet and started shaking next to me. Warren stood up calmly and said, "Congratulations are in order for the two pieces of trash who found each other." He looked directly at Frank and me, held up his middle finger, and walked out of the party.
Just like that.
Left me standing there in front of everyone who mattered to us, with those horrible pictures still frozen on the screen behind me. The silence felt like it lasted forever. Nobody knew what to say or do. Frank's dad was staring at his son like he didn't recognize him. Warren's mom was crying. My mom looked absolutely mortified. I tried to say something, anything, to explain what they'd just seen, but what could I possibly say? Those pictures told the whole story, and it wasn't a story that made me look good. People started leaving immediately. No one said goodbye, no one made eye contact with me. They just grabbed their coats and purses and got out of there as fast as possible. Frank tried to say something to his parents, but his dad told him not to even speak. My parents stayed until everyone else left, and then my dad just looked at me and said he was disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed, which somehow felt worse. I spent that night alone in the house, crying harder than I had since I was a kid. Not just because of the humiliation, though that was horrible enough, but because I realized Warren had been planning this the whole time. He'd known exactly what he saw that day, and instead of giving me a chance to explain or work things out, he'd planned this elaborate revenge. He'd let me believe everything was fine while he plotted to destroy me in front of everyone we knew. The worst part was realizing that Warren had been distant and cold for months, but apparently he was capable of planning something this calculated and cruel. If he could put this much thought and energy into humiliating me, why couldn't he have put that same effort into saving our relationship? Why couldn't he have fought for us, instead of just checking out emotionally and leaving me to figure things out on my own? Frank stopped returning my calls after that night. His family completely cut him off, and mine made it clear they were ashamed of me. Warren moved out while I was at work the next day and took everything that was his. He left divorce papers on the kitchen counter with a note saying he'd never forgive me for betraying him with his own brother. He made it sound like I'd planned this whole thing to hurt him specifically, like I'd targeted Frank just to be cruel. What Warren didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I hadn't set out to hurt anyone. I'd just been so lonely and neglected in our relationship that when someone finally showed me attention and care, I responded to it. Frank made me feel valued and heard in ways Warren had stopped doing. Yes, Frank being Warren's brother made it worse, but it wasn't like I chose Frank to hurt Warren. I chose Frank because he was there for me when Warren wasn't. The divorce was finalized within 3 months. Warren had those pictures as evidence, so there wasn't much I could fight. He got the house, most of our mutual friends took his side, and I lost several clients when word got around about what had happened. Apparently, people don't want their wedding coordinator to be someone who cheated on her partner at their anniversary party. Warren made sure everyone knew exactly what I'd done and why he'd left me. I ended up having to move back in with my parents at 28 years old, starting my life completely over. My event planning business basically collapsed because Warren had made sure everyone in our social circle knew what kind of person I was. He painted me as this manipulative woman who seduced his innocent brother and destroyed their family. Frank moved to another state and changed his phone number, so I couldn't even talk to the one person who understood my side of things. Meanwhile, Warren was thriving. He got promoted at work, started going out with friends again, seemed happier than he'd been in years. People kept telling me how much better he looked, how he was like a new person now that he'd gotten rid of me. Like, I'd been this burden dragging him down, when really, I'd been the one trying to save our relationship while he checked out completely. The thing that really gets me is that everyone acts like Warren is this innocent victim, and I'm this evil woman who destroyed a perfect relationship. But they don't know what it was like living with someone who treated me like I was invisible. They don't know how many times I tried to talk to Warren about our problems, how many times I suggested counseling or date nights or anything to reconnect. They just see the cheating and decide I'm the villain. I'm not saying what I did was right, but Warren shares some responsibility for how we got there. He emotionally abandoned me long before I ever developed feelings for Frank. He made me feel unwanted and unimportant and taken for granted. When Frank came along and made me feel the opposite of all those things, of course I was going to be drawn to that. Warren created the conditions that led to this happening, even if he didn't deserve what I did. Now I'm 28, single, living with my parents, and starting over completely. Warren has moved on, and everyone thinks he's better off without me. Frank won't talk to me, our families hate me, and I've lost almost everything that mattered to me. All because Warren couldn't be bothered to notice that his girlfriend was dying inside their relationship, and when someone else did notice, he chose revenge over trying to understand why it happened. I know I'll never forgive him for humiliating me like that instead of being a man and dealing with our problems privately.